Hello, on this video I want to talk about functions. So the first step is to actually create the function. I want to use the keywords def to define the function, and then I'm going to give it a name. So the name of my function is going to be do something. Parenthesis, semicolon, I'm going to just print hello world here. So this is a function. Now, if I run this program as is, nothing happens. And the reason nothing happens is because I'm not calling the function. And in order to call the function, I'm going to use the name of the function to call it. So now when I call the function, it will actually execute this code here. So when I run, it displays hello world. When Python executes this code, it goes from top to bottom. It goes on line 1, line 2, line 3, and then line 4, it sees a function, but it doesn't execute, it just sees it. And it doesn't execute because there's no call for the function. And then it goes line 6, 7, 8, 9, and then finally on line 9, there's a call to the function. So at this point here, Python goes all the way here, then executes this code, and once it's done, it sends the execution of the code right here on line number 10. So in other words, this function only gets executed when you call it. I'm just going to change the message here to apple pie. So I change the message and I get something else here. But let's say I want to print apple pie plus something else. So for that, I'm going to create a variable here called flavor. And I want to assign the word cinnamon to this flavor. But let's say I want cinnamon to be printed right here together with apple pie. So in order for me to do that, I'm going to pass the flavor right here as a parameter to the function. So if I run this code as is, it's going to give me a error because I'm sending a parameter here, a argument, and the function is not receiving it. So now I need to create an argument right here on the function so the function can receive the parameter that the function call is sending. So I'm going to create a variable here called flavor, and I'm going to purposely put a different name here, and pretty soon you're going to see why. So I'm going to put the flavor right here in front, and now I'm going to run this code, and now the code prints cinnamon apple pie because I'm passing the flavor to the function, and then the function is receiving as a flavor and then printing the flavor. Now, one thing here, if you are a developer from C++ or C# or any other language, you're going to see that if you write this code on another language, it would not work. Because in any other language, the flavor, the variable flavor, would not be available to this function. However, in Python, if you run this, it's going to run just as fine. The reason is because whenever you're executing a function and Python does not see the variable, it starts looking for the variable somewhere else. So it will go out of the function and start looking for the variable. In this case here, it will interpret the flavor variable as a global value. And because of that, it will print the flavor. But doing this is never a good programming behavior. So always use the value that you're passing as a parameter right here. All right, so I'm passing one value, but what if I want to pass another value? Size equals large, for example. So I'm going to press flavor and then size, and here I'm going to press flavor and size. So I'm going to put the variables there, and this is going to work just as fine. If I want to create another one, I can. Let's say shape equals round, and then I'm going to pass the shape here, and then I'm going to use the shape value here, and this works just fine. But now we have a problem, and the problem is if I change the sequence or the order in which I'm calling the function and passing the values, what happens is this code is going to run just as fine. However, the way it prints the value is different. And the reason is because the way this function receives the value, the sequence of the arguments matter. So if you change the sequence of the arguments, even though you mean to pass flavor, shape, and size, once it receives over there, it will receive the shape in the size variable, and the shape will be the size. So this becomes a problem. So how do we solve this problem of not mixing it up, the values that you're sending? We're going to add a star right here in the beginning, followed by a comma. So star, comma, and once you do that, you're going to be forcing the function call, in other words, this call here, you're going to force this call to not be positional arguments, but to actually pass the arguments together with the value. So in order for us to fix this, I'm going to get the flavor variable. I'm going to put it right here. So flavor equals flavor, then shape equals shape, and then finally size equals size. So now I'm telling the function that whenever I'm passing this value, they are, the flavor is actually the flavor, the shape is the shape, and the size is actually the size. So now if I run this, I'm going to have this sequence, and if I change this sequence, for example, I'm going to put the shape at the end, and then I'm going to run again, you're going to see that the sequence in which the function printed the values did not change, even though I switched the size with the shape. So doing this, you always ensure that whatever value you're passing to the function will be the proper one receiving by the function right here in the top. All right, so let's move on. You can pass no parameters, one parameter, two parameters, or you can pass many parameters with the star here. So what if you want a variable number of arguments when you're calling the function? So in this case here, I'm passing only 3 values, but what if I have a variable number of values, right? So let's say I have, say A equals 1, B equals 3, and C equals 5. Then I want to call the function with A and B. And then next time I want to call the same function with A, B, C. So when I do that, I cannot be receiving the function like this. I'm going to receive with a star and then args. So what happened here is args. So what happened in this case, you're receiving here the variables as a tuple. So this will be a tuple. So when I call this function will work when I pass 2 variables or when I pass 3 variables or 3 values. When you want to call the function with a different number of arguments, you want to receive as args right here. And then no matter what you pass, it's going to work. If it's passing 1, 2, or 3, it's going to work just as fine. So let's do here with only the value A and run again, and it's going to work. So just don't forget that whatever you're getting here is actually a tuple, not a list. So here I'm printing the entire tuple at once, but if you want to print one by one, you can just create a for loop here. So for I in args, print I, and then you do have your values here. So I'm gonna delete this item right here. So now you have your values printed individually, and just in case if you want to change the tuple, you can convert the tuple to a list. And in order to do that, all we have to do is args equals lists args, and that will convert this to a list. All right, so let's move on here. Let's say you want to do this thing here, but now you are mixing the values, right? You meant to pass ABC, but you end up passing ACA. So the function doesn't care. The function will print everything else, right? So if you want to force this to pass not only the value, but actually the variable, then we're going to put another star right here. And then once we put the star, now you're forcing the function call to not do a positional argument call, to actually pass the values and the name of those values to the function. So because you do not have the names defined here, then you can define the name on the fly. So here I'm going to put num1 equals A, then num2 equals C, B, and then finally num3 equals C. I'm defining the name of each value on the fly here. So instead of defining here, I'm defining right here. Now, once you do that, it's not a tuple anymore. It's actually a dictionary. In order for you to print the dictionary, remember the dictionary comes in key value pair. So on the for loop, instead of putting I, I'm going to put the K and V for key value pairs. And then I'm going to put the dot items right here to get me the actual item of the dictionary. And then when I print, I'm going to print the K and the V for values. So now if I run this, it will print the key here, which is in this case number 1, and then the value of A, which is 1. It prints the 1 right here. Then the same thing with number 2 and the letter B, and number 3 and C. So the good thing about this is if I want to call this and pass only 2 values, this thing will work just as fine. And let me put a just for a new line here. All right, so it will print the one with 3 values as well the ones with 2 values. So doing this way, it will accept any number of values when you call the function, but just be aware that now it's a dictionary. All right, so I'm going to remove these guys here, and I'm going to make this function simple again, because I want to show you now the default values for a function. So let's say here in this function, I'm passing A, B, and C, and the function is receiving, let's say num1, num2, and then finally num3. When I call this function with num1, num2, num3, and then I'm going to print the values right here, num2. All right, so when I call this function, it prints 1, 3, and 5, right? Now, if I decided to ignore one value here and I call this function, it gives me an error. And it says, hey, the num3 is missing. Now, if I define here a default value for num3, then I do not necessarily need to pass number 3. So if my default number 3 is, let's say, 22, then I can call and this works just as fine. So even though I'm not passing the value of num3 here, the num3 will assume the value 22 every time the third parameter is missing. And you can do with number 2 as well. So let's say number 2 is 33. And I'm going to omit the second variable. So in this case, it will assume the value of 33, and then the third one will assume the value of 22. But now, if I decided to pass those values, it will not assume the default values. It will assume the values that I'm passing as a parameter. So now if I run this, instead of 33, it prints the 3, which is the value that I'm passing. And instead of 22, it assumes the 5. So that's how you do the default values for a function. So I'm going to remove the default values here because I want to talk about one more thing here. I want to talk about the return. The return is a variable that this function is going to return to the function call. So I'm going to create a variable here called total, and total is going to be number 1 plus number 2 plus number 3, and then finally I'm going to return the total. All right, now if I run this program as is, I'm returning the total and nothing happens. Nothing's happening because when you call this function, it returns the total. So the total gets placed right here in the do something. So it's the same thing as crossing everything here and replace this whole thing here with whatever value it's returning. So in this case, it's adding 5 plus 3 plus 1. So it's going to return the number 9. So it's the same thing as erasing everything here and placing the 9 here. So if it's the same thing, so you would be doing something like this. When you call the function, you would just replace 9 with the function call. So if I run this program, nothing happens. But why? Because I'm not doing anything with the value that returns. So in order for me to save the returning value, I need to save it somewhere. So I'm going to create a variable here called x equals whatever value that the function is returning. So now this thing here is going to get replaced with 9, and then 9 will be saved on the variable x. And now if you want to print x here, you will actually print the total which came from the function. So you can call it and it can return the value, but you must save the value, because if you don't save the value, it's gone. Now you can also print the value here instead of printing the x value, and this is going to work just as fine. The only problem is you don't have it saved, so you're going to lose it after you execute this code. All right, so you print x. So let's say now I want to return the total, but I want to return a second total. So I want to return the total number 2, which equals total times 2. So I can now return total and a second variable t2. So now if I run this as is, it's going to work just as fine. However, if I want this in a separate value, I'm going to save this in 2 variables, and then I can print 2 separate variables, and now I have 2 separate variables here instead of 1 collection on here. So you can, in Python, return 1 or 2 or 3 values, or as many values as you want. In some other languages, you cannot do that. This is a Python thing. All right, so that's all for this video. Thanks for watching.